This is part 4 of Module 4, the Pragmatics of Emotion. In part 4, I am going to deal with emotions flaring up, shared knowledge, and unshared values. Understanding in institutional settings may or may not occur. Part 3 of this module by Professor Sancho discussed the repercussions in risk management. In this part 4, I want to talk about misunderstanding in institutional settings, some more public and some more private, leading to emotional reactions or emotional flare-ups. For spoken and written communication, interpretation, that is, drawing inferences, by the hearer or reader, must depend upon correct interpretation or inferences, which in turn depend on shared knowledge, but also mutual knowledge. In another slide, I will distinguish between these two. The intended interpretation may be broad, sometimes too broad, but this interpretation can be limited or constrained mutually by the context of the message, if we share and have mutual knowledge, or the content of the message, if we share and have mutual knowledge. This brings us to our next question. How much is shared? Shared knowledge is defined as based on the same culture, perhaps on social class or age or religious conviction, or regional provenance. We have to the right here, a picture of people who might be within the same culture, but are quite different. Mutual knowledge, on the other hand, is the same underlying value system. So what happens when little is shared, even within the same cultural context? When culture is not shared, we may have intercultural mismatch, as in the picture below. As when you are not sure how to address the other participants, as doctor, as Mrs., maybe she will be offended, should call her Ms., or professor, or a first name. Now I would like to give one example, which is a personal example, of personal address at work, which may cause potential problems. The context is a teacher, myself, at a secondary school in Wisconsin very long ago in 1966. The participants are myself, I had just graduated from university, a teacher of Spanish, about 22 years old. The other participant is Mrs. Smith, an older teacher, about 55, a teacher of history and geography. The setting is the teacher's room, depicted here to the right. Teachers go to the teacher's room for time to relax, have a coffee, prepare lessons, correct exams. Sometimes there is a lot of talking, and if people are working hard, then there is practically no talking. Now, my problem here as a young participant addressing an older participant in a work setting was, even though in the same cultural context, I was not exactly sure how to address her. I suppose that we had shared knowledge, we were both teachers, but possibly not shared values. Of course, in Spain, the form of address would be clear immediately, because as soon as you use a verb, you have to choose between the informal you, tú, or the formal you, usted. Now, I still had a dilemma here in how I should address this older teacher. You might think that the personal pronoun in English, you, is very useful because you don't have to decide anything, but it's not as totally useful as you might think, especially if the person you are addressing is not looking at you. So if I called this veteran teacher by her first name, perhaps that would be too informal. Her inference might be, this young teacher thinks she is on the same level of teaching knowledge as I am. If I called her Mrs. Smith, perhaps that would be too formal. Then the inference might be, this young teacher thinks that I am rather old and perhaps out of date. So I solved this problem by just asking her, can I call you Mary? A very simple solution. The second example is about mutual knowledge, we suppose, but unshared values of address. The context is political discussion in the United States concerning trade deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership in May of 2015. The participants are President Obama, who was for this trade deal, and Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was against it. And there are some other participants, Ms. O'Neill, the president of NOW, North American Organization for Women, and a few other female commentators, news commentators. So the setting is President Obama speaking to Yahoo News in an interview. And as he was speaking about Senator Warren's opposition, he referred to her only by her first name, Elizabeth. Now, there was some emotional flare-up over this because this address was seen as disrespectful. Here we have President Obama trying to explain himself in the picture to the right. People with feminist backgrounds, we are a little tired of men addressing women by their first name in a meeting, but if there are other men, they address them by their official post, Senator Smith, Congressman Johnson. So this is why the emotions flared up. Obama was then accused of using sexist language by the media, mostly women in the media. This led to 1 week of news people questioning President Obama about his use of sexist language. Unfortunately for him, this put the focus away from the trade deal and towards how he was going to explain himself about his supposed use of sexist language, even though he and Elizabeth Warren are members of the same party and have known each other for a very long time. The third example is about mutual knowledge and unshared values in a very serious accident, the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. The context is the meltdown of a nuclear power plant in 1979 in Pennsylvania. The participants are the engineering branch, in particular the head engineer, and managers of the nuclear services branch. These last people are the ones who are in charge of the operators who are actually inside the nuclear power plant. The setting is the following. An engineer sent a memorandum, to a manager in the nuclear services branch. The engineer listed consequences of mishandling of the cooling system in other power plants. However, his message showed no emotion words of warning, apprehension, fear, danger, immediate danger. So the result was a mismatch in communication. The engineering branch did not communicate the danger efficiently in fact, they didn't communicate anything to the nuclear services branch. Thus, the nuclear service branch understood that there was no immediate danger or threat. The nuclear service branch did not advise the operators with specific instructions, and therefore the operators logically did not activate the cooling system according to emergency specifications. Now, posterior discourse analysis has shown us the consequences of this lack of emotion when there should have been emotion. The engineer wrote a memorandum, not a formal letter of warning. The engineer used polite, mitigated language so as not to offend the nuclear services branch. He used words such as perhaps or suggest. And when he referred to this situation, this dangerous situation, he called it a subject and not a problem, and certainly not a critical problem, which it was. So, in summary, as we have seen, the way speakers and writers address hearers and readers may have great personal or public consequences. This depends on which inferences the hearers are able to interpret. As also seen, inferences and interpretation may be limited by mutual knowledge and/or mutual shared values. But for communication to be successful, we must be sure that such mutual knowledge and values actually are shared. When mutual knowledge is not shared or hidden, as in the case of the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident, the results might be quite disastrous indeed.